All right, show of hands. Who's seen that movie? Wow. Pastor John, you were wrong. I'm calling you out. Won't be the first, won't be the last. Yeah, it's called The Truman Show. And it's about Jim Carrey's character is named Truman Burbank. His entire life had been broadcast as a TV show. From birth right up until that scene where he walks off the set. See, he was the focal point of this show, but he never knew there was a show going on. He just was going about his life. The people who had designed the set, the place where he lived, planned it very carefully to restrict his movements so he couldn't go places. It was a self-contained little world. He had it in front of him, little dome. It was a model of it. This little world inside of a huge dome. They controlled the sunlight, they controlled the weather, they controlled the temperature, they controlled the whole thing. So it was set on an island, so if he tried to leave, they could make a storm if he went on a boat, or he could take the bridge out if he was going to take the bridge, so they were controlling him. They kept him in this little bubble. Truman Burbank, that guy, is the first character that we're going to talk about today as we continue our series on hope. Today we're talking about opportunity, and specifically how to persevere in hope when opportunities are few. Again, like last week, our key thought is that hope is a favorable feeling about an immediate desire and an eventual dream. Okay, show of hands. Who here has felt a lack of hope regarding opportunities in their life? Wow, yeah, me too. Okay. Things like, if you're looking for work and there's nothing available, or nothing that's available seems to fit, or if you want to buy a new home and there's nothing in your price range, or the stuff that's in your price range you don't want to live in, or maybe you're feeling stuck in your job, like you're at a dead-end point in your career, you can't advance anymore. I had a job like that one time. It was actually the company that I'm with now. I was with them before, and I left to go back to school, and now I've come back to them. I work for CarQuest Auto Parts. I sell car parts. If you ever need brakes or oil change, come see me. Too late? I know, I'm sorry. I'm not saying I'll do the oil change, but I can get you the parts on the cheap. Right? Yeah. Testify. Anyway, back then, this was several years ago now, I was in this job, but I was looking for some kind of meaning in my life, and I wasn't finding it there. And I remembered the day that it hit me that I was stuck in that job and that it wasn't going to be any more than it already was. You have to forgive me, but in that environment, you're surrounded by mechanics and by cars and car parts, and so you start to, I wouldn't say judge, you start to maybe identify who people are by what kind of car they drive. You get to see the people with the nice cars, whatever, you sell car parts, so it means something. And one of the bigwigs that came into town, and he was driving a Chevy Impala, and I'm like, the most important guy I'm ever going to meet in this company drives a Chevy Impala. Everybody drives a Chevy Impala. That's not anything spectacular. And so that is trite as that might seem, really resonated with me. It hit me that these plain Jane cars was all I had to look forward to if I stayed in the company. And the rest of the guys that I worked with in the store, they'd been with the company for decades. And they didn't know vastly much more than I did after a few years. There's not a lot to the job. And none of them were much better off than I am, or was at the time financially. So I was starting to feel cornered, starting to feel like I was stuck there. My opportunities were limited. Even if I advanced within that company, I wasn't going to advance personally. So what happened was I became miserable to work with. I was that guy. I was always fighting with the boss, with my manager, and I really felt like I was going to be stuck in that company. So what I experienced years ago is like what Truman was going through in The Truman Show. There's a picture of the small version of where he lived. And you can see how they could control him. There's one bridge, take it out. There's a sea, make a storm if they don't want him to leave. But he was always trying to leave. He had all kinds of hope. And they just kept thwarting him, trying to take these opportunities. Every time he tried to think outside of this little bubble, he got shut down. His opportunities were just hopelessly restricted by the space that they had him quarantined in. And the question that may have popped into his mind was, what keeps holding me back? What is this? Have any of you ever felt like that? What is holding me back? Can't identify it, but man, I'm stuck. It can be difficult to overcome those kind of restrictions in your life that are put in your way by others, like what happened to Truman. But what if the problem that you're facing is because of something you've done, because of your own mistakes? Let me introduce you to Bob Lutz. Does anyone know who Bob Lutz is? This is kind of way off the handle. Nope. Good. He's retired now, but he was vice president of GM. And before he was vice president of GM, he was vice president also of Ford and BMW, and he was president of Chrysler. And he was responsible for things like the Ford Explorer, maybe one of the most popular sport utilities ever. When he was at Chrysler, he was responsible for the Dodge Viper and the BMW 3 Series, which unless you're a car nut, that doesn't mean a whole lot, but it's a cool little BMW. He was into all that stuff, was his doing, so to speak. Needless to say, this guy knows his way around the car industry. Well, in the late 1990s, when he was VP, GM put out this car, which is a Saturn EV1. Anybody remember that thing? No? They didn't last real long because GM put these things out and then they immediately got scared that this wasn't going to be a viable platform to sell. And so what they did was they crushed them. They recalled them and literally crushed them. All of them. And the ones that they didn't crush, they dismantled the computers so they wouldn't work anymore. They're in museums and collectors have them and stuff. There's a movie, side note, called Who Killed the Electric Car? It's all about that. And it'll just make you want to why? It's a really cool little car. Anyway, I'll get on a soapbox about that one. So that was in the late 90s. Several years later, now GM wants to try to get back into this electric hybrid market. And so the car they come up with is the Chevy Volt. Some of you may have seen those. They're pretty popular around. But they got Bob Lutz as the front man again. So now here's Bob trying to sell an electric hybrid car to the electric hybrid community that he just crushed all their EV1s not too long ago. And so it's a really bad stigma to try and get over that you killed you killed our babies. Why would you do that? And now you want to sell us another one? That's crazy. Now, not only did he have to deal with that, he also had to deal with the fact that this all happened during like the global financial, when the GM went bankrupt, Chapter 11 bankruptcy. So, I mean, they had insult to injury. They didn't have any money either. Now, sometimes in life, we'll hesitate to grasp at an opportunity because of some mistake or failure that we've had in the past, like that. But now sometimes we have difficulty with opportunities, not because of the past, but because maybe the timing in the present isn't quite right. Maybe introduce you to the next car guy we're going to talk about. This is Elon Musk. You may have heard his name. He's like the textbook definition of an entrepreneur. He's famous for selling PayPal to eBay, and he got all kinds of money for that. And he owns and runs SpaceX, which is a private company that went into space, which is crazy. But we're going to talk about him to do with Tesla Motors, which is a company that makes these little electric supercars. That's the Tesla Roadster. I get a smile on my face. That's so cool. I saw one in real life one time. I almost drove my truck off the road trying to see it. It was all they're neat. They're tiny. It doesn't matter. This is the Tesla Roadster. It's a $100,000 car. It'll go 125 miles an hour, and it'll cost you less than 2 cents a mile to do that, which is great, except for the $100,000 part. Anyway, the development and the early production of this car was a trial for Elon because it took place during that same time that GM was in bankruptcy court, that same financial crisis time. And Elon, who now today he's worth about 12 billion with a B dollars. But at that time, he had just about all of his money sunk into getting this Tesla Roadster going. And then the financial crisis hit, and you can see that there was a movie, and there's just everybody's gone. There's nobody left in the building because they couldn't afford to pay anybody. And the problem with that is they'd already taken $50,000 deposits from lots of people on these cars, and now they got all these cars, and we need to get them out, but there's no investments anymore, and there's no money. So Elon was accused of doing what they call a bait and switch, which is he upped the prices on the cars, but not just to the new people, but also to the people who already had deposits down. So people weren't real happy about that. while that was all going on, they also found out that there were some delays in production because they were getting substandard parts and they were having some trouble with workers being reliable. So just all this stuff happened at once. He eventually applied for what amounted to about half of another $1 billion loan from the Department of Energy just to keep things going. But during the heat of all of that, he said, right now we're facing an issue. It's a crisis of confidence among our customers. You can only tell them delays so many times, and then they start to think, man, is this company ever going to get me a car? And some of these people waited years. And when the timing is off and every opportunity seems to be squashed by bad timing, it's easy to lose hope. But what happens if the timing is perfect and then suddenly some event or string of events comes along and ruins everything? This is our next car guy. This guy's name is Gadget. Self-identifies as Gadget. His real name is Greg Abbott, and these days he goes as Reverend Gadget. I'm not sure what kind of church he runs, but there's Reverend Gadget. It's a moving church, that's right. Church on the move. About 10 years ago, when all the other things we were talking about were going on, he was doing what Tesla and GM were doing, but in his shed, like at a much smaller scale. He's the kind of guy that when he sees something that he wants to do, he jumps right on it and he does it. He's got a pretty big shop, or he did have a pretty big shop, where he had all kinds of cars, including this one, which was his pride and joy. It's a 356 Porsche Speedster replica, but it's electric. You can see the batteries in the front. But everything seemed to be going fine, but then tragedy struck. And the way the story goes is one night his wife woke up and heard something and smelled something, and what happened was everything burned. The whole shop, he had, I think it said 7 electric vehicles, all lost. $250,000 worth of tools and equipment, all lost. No insurance. Now, like I said, Gadget's a go-getter, so in this picture, he's actually motioning towards where the 356 had been sitting, where that Porsche, it's the remnants of it. Well, like I said, Gadget's a go-getter. He doesn't like to sit still, so he went out and bought a new building, big warehouse, and had a little yard in the back where he was going to grow a garden. This was going to be his new shop and his new home. So he gets all his equipment, buys new equipment, puts it all in. A couple months in, there were pigeons living in this, like they do in big vacant buildings. Well, they found out that the pigeon infestation had been there for years. And so, so they had the airborne yeast and dust mites and the things that birds will leave around. And then they also found out that the paint on the interior walls that was all peeling was lead paint. Then they found out that the company that had been there before they got the building was one of these places that recycles toner cartridges and mercury light bulbs and batteries. So Gadget's words were, this new place was a toxic waste. He had to wear a respirator just to be in there at all. And his heart was broken. He couldn't be there anymore. So they were forced to abandon their new home. I don't want to be a downer. Everything's okay. It is sad, I know, but it's going to get better, I promise. Everything worked out for all of these guys, I promise. Now, it's easy to listen to these stories and think, these are extreme situations. But the truth is, we've all experienced things that fit into those 4 categories. Whether it's dealing with restrictions that are holding us back, or our past that's setting a negative precedent, or the timing being off, which is delaying our plans, or having to deal with what seems like insurmountable obstacles, we've all felt like giving up hope at some time or another. Life can seem really hopeless sometimes. The saying goes, life is tough, get a helmet, right? I still think we should have put that on the sign. We were going to put that on the sign out front, and we didn't. I know it sounds silly, but if you think about it, the saying doesn't go, life is tough, so avoid it. The saying doesn't say, life is tough, so better not even try, don't show up today. No, once we realize that life is tough, we put on our helmet, and we just keep at it. So now we've talked about the problems that make it hard to persevere in hope when opportunities seem few, but now let's talk about some of the answers. This is the good part, Kelsey. Okay. It's okay. In the book of Genesis, there's a great story about maintaining hope through hard times and trials when you think all hope is lost. And it comes from Joseph. Joseph was the son of Jacob. Jacob was also called Israel. He was Jacob's favorite son. Now, Joseph's story isn't success from start to finish. In fact, he had a harder time than any of the guys we've already talked about. He dealt with all the problems we've already talked about, but the difference is that he persevered through all these problems, these difficulties, by relying on God. Let me tell you a little bit about Joseph. Joseph was a dreamer. His brothers said, "Here comes this dreamer," when they saw him coming. And he would have these dreams and tell everybody about them. Well, his brothers had gotten tired, of listening to Joseph's dreams, because his dreams were all about how he was going to become great, and they were all going to bow down to him. And it also bothered the brothers that their father favored him so much. So what happened was all the rest of his brothers plotted to kill him. And what they did was they threw him down a cistern. This is a dramatic reenactment. A cistern, which is also a well. There was no water in it. They just threw him in this empty hole in the ground, and they were going to leave him for dead. But then a band of Ishmaelite traders came by, and they decided, rather than leave him in the well, they took him out of the well and sold him off to these traders. Now, once these guys got Joseph into Egypt, they sold him to a guy named Potiphar. It became clear to Potiphar that Joseph was trustworthy, so Potiphar put him in charge of his whole estate, put him in charge of his whole household. Well, then, after some time as a successful overseer of the household, things got a little bad for Joseph when Potiphar's wife started coming on to him and even tried to force him into bed with her. And that is what you call a no-no. Joseph refused, of course, because he didn't want to dishonor his master or God, most importantly. But she just kept being persistent with him. Eventually, after he refused her several times, she was so mad she told her husband that he had been trying to force himself on her. And so then Potiphar throws Joseph in prison. Because, like I said, that's a no-no. While Joseph was in prison, he was again put in charge of things. He was kind of in charge of the prisoners. In the prison, he met two Egyptian officials and interpreted their dreams for them. One of these officials promised to put in a good word with Pharaoh when he got out. But then when he got out, he forgot to say anything to Pharaoh, and it was like a couple years. Well, eventually, this Egyptian official did mention Joseph's name to Pharaoh, and he told Pharaoh about how Joseph had interpreted their dreams, and Pharaoh was having dreams that he couldn't understand. So they brought Joseph out to talk to Pharaoh and interpret his dreams. What Joseph told Pharaoh about his dream was that there was going to come a time in the land in Egypt when they were going to have 7 years of abundance of crops and then 7 years of famine, and that they needed to plan ahead and store up things so that during the famine they wouldn't all die. And Pharaoh was amazed because this made sense to him, and he believed him, and so he put Joseph in charge of that whole operation of stockpiling the food and the grain for all these years, and so Joseph was in charge of that. Now, it was in that position of authority under Pharaoh, and because of his ability to interpret Pharaoh's dream, that Joseph was able to save an entire nation from starvation, and eventually he was reunited with his family. It's the fastest telling of the Joseph story ever, I think. See me after if I missed anything. Now, Joseph was able to do all of that because of his dedication to God. Joseph remained faithful to God and trusted God through all the obstacles and all the hard times that came his way. At any point, Joseph could have settled. Joseph could have said, "That's it, I'm not going to try anymore." When he became a slave, he could have just been a regular slave and not stood out. Then, after Potiphar saw that he was a man of God, he became the head of Potiphar's estate, and that would have been okay to just settle for that too, but then he got thrown in prison. Well, he did so good there, they put him in charge of that. And he could have stayed and been manager of the prison, but no, the next opportunity came, and he went to Pharaoh. Even though Joseph didn't see the big picture, the end of the story, I'll there's a picture of him as governor. Even though Joseph didn't see this point where he was going to be governor of Egypt, he didn't see the big picture. He was faithful to God. He trusted God. We're all like Joseph. We all get put into situations that challenge us. We're like Joseph in another way, too, that we don't see the big picture either. We have to trust that God sees the big picture. God's in charge. God has created all of creation. He's in control of all kinds of everything. You can trust that he's got a plan for you too. You know, each of us is going to find times in our lives when we feel restricted or held back. And we have trouble finding opportunities. In those times, we can take comfort in the fact that God only wants the best for us. And we can trust God and see that his plans for us are good. We've all experienced things and made bad decisions in our past that have lasting repercussions in our lives. If we can take a step back from whatever guilt or conviction we might be feeling about that, hopefully we can find peace in the knowledge that if we love God and if we trust him, if we live for him, there's nothing he can't do for his glory. And then there are seasons in our lives when we feel like our progress bar has kind of stopped moving, the little hourglass is spinning, and we start running out of patience. In those times, it's important to cling to our hope and to try to focus on the fact that God is faithful to us and trust God. And when life throws us the curveballs, when things get out of shape, we get the short end of the stick, that's when we need to dig down deep inside ourselves, grit our teeth, and just wait it out. Stay faithful to God, and your faith will grow stronger. Trust God, and he will sustain you. When things get tough and we start to question whether we'll ever get our chance, it's very tempting to just give up and sit down and sulk. It always will be easier to just give up. But with a little faith, God will show you how awesome he created you to be. If you trust God, he will show you his plans for you. Don't let those problems that are listed on the insert, don't let those problems overshadow your trust of God. And our takeaway today, God has more opportunities in store for you than you can think. God knows all time, all creation. He knows what's best. He knows what he's got planned for you, and you just have to trust him, and you'll get to see it. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, God, thank you for your faithfulness to us. All our hope is in you, God. We trust you. If we're struggling with trust this morning, I just pray that you'd make yourself known to us. Make your plan known to us in some small way so that we can understand that you're in our corner. We know that you love us. Please continue to show us, however small at a time, but show us your plan. Because we're eager to serve you, God. We want to give back to you. We're looking for any opportunity, Lord, to serve and to best put the gifts you gave us to use. So I would pray that those opportunities would be made plain to us, make us see them. Sometimes, Lord, I know for me, they've been right in front of my face and I've missed them. Lord, let them be as bright as daylight. We don't want to miss you. We love you, God. Thank you. In Jesus' name, amen.